In this video, I'm going to deconstruct the stereotype that modern RPGs offer too much hand-holding. I'll be defining modern as games released within the last 5 years. Let's get into it. When was the last time you played a game that really made you think? Like, really hard? It just feels like it doesn't happen these days. Let's break down why that is. We should first begin by defining what is hand-holding. Collins Dictionary defines hand-holding as the providing of attentive support or instruction as to calm or lessen anxiety or fear. Hearing this, you may see hand-holding in video games as a good thing. Well, as the saying goes, too much of a good thing can be bad for you, and in video games, this is certainly true. Let's take God of War Ragnarok for example. You've just finished a grueling battle, and now that you've cleared the area, you're ready to start the puzzle. Until...
Think you can uncover that geyser from here?
Okay, got the cover off. What should I possibly do next? Let's just have a moment to think.
I think I get it. If you freeze the geyser, the pressure will turn the wheel.
Seriously? The saying, show me, don't tell me, has never been truer than in this example. This continues to happen throughout God of War, with Arceus continuing to tell you what to do and where to go, giving almost no time for the player to analyse the situation and figure it out on their own. But the strange thing about God of War is they do a great job of using signifiers within their games to subtly guide the player in the direction they need to go without physically having to tell them, giving the player greater satisfaction of success. Take this clip for example. The white markings on the wall indicate where the player needs to go, and through repetition of these symbols, the player quickly learns that when they see them, they're heading in the right direction. However, telling the player exactly what to do, where to go, just turns them into mindless robots that simply follow instructions and do as they're told. And it would appear I'm not the only one who thinks this, because just 5 days after the game's release, Jade King wrote an article for TheGamer.com titled, God of War Ragnarok needs to let me solve puzzles on my own. She expresses her frustrations with the game's overly helpful hints, and goes on to say, the moment you step foot into a puzzle arena, you're treated like a fool. A few seconds pass, and Atreus is already handing me the solution on a silver platter. It's clear that Ragnarok is overly generous with its hints, but is there a way to guide the player without directly telling them? Yes, let's take a look at how Uncharted 4 handles it. To begin, you enter the puzzle room and are immediately drawn to the wheel in the centre due to clever strategic lighting. As you get closer to the wheel, the use of spatial UI indicates to the player that they are able to use it without breaking the immersion. Once the player interacts, the framing of the camera slowly pans up to focus on another spotlight, this time with the silhouette of a symbol inside. And then finally, some more UI appears on the screen to tell the player how to interact with the wheel. The player is then left to their own devices to figure out the remainder of the puzzle themselves, whilst they have been subconsciously guided by the developers to give them the resources needed to complete it. Giving the player hints this way still allows the player to remain immersed in the world, gain the information they need, all without having to insult their intelligence. But overly helpful NPCs are not the only way that modern RPGs offer too much handholding. This is done in other ways too. Take Cyberpunk 2077 for example. The game boasts this incredibly beautiful open world with so much to explore and do, yet every time you start a quest, a little dotted line appears on your minimap and a giant yellow marker appears on your screen. You then spend the duration of the journey to the quest marker staring at the top right of your screen, ensuring that you never stray from the line, and in doing so, you miss out on so much that the world has to offer. Now as a developer, you need to guide your player to their quests. However, making the player mindlessly go from waypoint to waypoint takes away the role-playing element of RPGs. The travel is always a huge part of RPGs, and in itself should feel like an adventure, and certainly not a commute. If we take a look at Morrowind for example, this game is all about immersion and making the player really feel like they are in that game world. Upon receiving a quest, you are given the location you need to go to, but that's it. If you have never been there before, then you must interact with other NPCs, look at signposts, or consult your journal for hints on where to go. Morrowind was great for giving the player a loose objective and realising that half of the fun was in the adventure. Oftentimes you may end up coming across a random dungeon or a small village that otherwise would have gone undiscovered if you had just followed a set waypoint. Now, if you're an avid gamer with unlimited time to sink into games like Morrowind, then the idea of no waypoints and no guidance may seem like an amazing idea. Andrew too recently wrote an article for CBR.com that echoes the statements I've already made. The article is titled, The Elder Scrolls, Morrowind proves that games are more immersive without quest markers. Within the article, they write, Morrowind refuses to hold the player's hand. When the player is given a quest, they will only be given their direction and sent on their way, requiring the gamer to follow the instructions in their journal and their sense of direction. Everything the player learns is through trial and error and baptism by fire. All of this compounds to make Morrowind feel less like a video game and more like an actual adventure. The world that Morrowind creates becomes unforgettable to players because, unlike modern games, the player travels all across on their own accord instead of mindlessly chasing a marker on a map. However, not everyone seemed to like this style, and due to a high volume of players left frustrated by not being able to find their way to a quest marker, a mod was created by the community to make the game more accessible to the majority. One player took to Reddit to air their frustrations, stating, "The main reason I can't enjoy this game is the lack of quest markers. Some people like me aren't hardcore Elder Scrolls fans, so we need a little help with this game." This thread led others to agree, with one user saying, "I feel your pain. I hate that Morrowind has no map markers, makes the game a chore." So from this information, it's clear that the community is split. It would appear to me that players want to feel immersed in the world while playing role-playing games, but also don't want to be made to feel stupid by the developers, giving them direct cues as to where to go and what to do. So why do developers feel the need to hold players' hands so much in modern RPGs? Well, this has to be due to how popular modern games have become compared to the classics. If we continue to compare Morrowind versus Cyberpunk 2077, it's clear to see the difference in numbers. Morrowind released back in May 2002, and by August 2005, just 3 years after its initial release, Bethesda managed to sell a staggering 4 million copies. But if we take a look at Cyberpunk 2077, which even before its initial release on the 10th of December 2020, it had already accrued an astounding 8 million pre-orders across all platforms. And as of September 2022, just under 2 years of its initial release, it sold more than 20 million copies worldwide. This shows just how much gaming has grown in the past 20 years. It also means that there's a much wider demographic of people that now play games, all with various backgrounds and different understandings of interactive media. So in order to appeal to the masses, game developers are almost forced to hold the player's hand and guide the user as to not upset the general player base. So while it may upset a few hardcore gamers, from a numbers and sales perspective, it would almost be irresponsible to exclude the majority of the potential players. But despite all of this, there is still one RPG that released in 2022 that dared to risk excluding casual gamers and pander completely to the hardcore fans who are craving a completely open world RPG experience with zero guidance and complete free reign. Elden Ring. There is a reason that Elden Ring won Game of the Year in 2022. It appeared to scratch the itch that many fans had for an RPG that offered zero handholding. However, if you analyse the game, you'll see that it will still guide the player in such a way that they may not even notice. Elden Ring uses subtle breadcrumbing in many forms to do this. From obvious paths and roads to ensure the player doesn't get too lost on their journey, to golden trails emitting from safe sites of grace that point in the direction the player should head to reach their next objective. But what players love about the game is that they're not restricted to having to head that way. They're still free to explore as they wish, but doing so won't progress the main story. But they may be rewarded with better weaponry and abilities to aid them later on. The game also uses gameplay barriers to stop the player from progressing too fast in the form of powerful bosses. In order to progress to the next area, oftentimes the player must defeat a boss that if they hadn't taken their time to level up, they may find it extremely difficult to defeat. Once again, this anti-hand-holding style of guidance leaves the user with a greater feeling of satisfaction, as they believe they had figured out everything on their own without realising that the developers had actually been using subtle visual language to nudge them in the right direction. So in conclusion, do modern RPGs offer too much handholding? Well, for the most part, yes, but for good reason. Times have changed and gaming is not just for the hardcore enthusiasts anymore. It's played by a much bigger demographic, and in order to allow everyone to enjoy the game, some people will require slightly more guidance than others, albeit sometimes a little too much.